This is the scariest thing that ever happened to me, and what makes it worse is that had things had gone differently, I might not be here to tell the story. Okay, first things first, I'm a girl about 5'7" and around 130 pounds. This happened to me about 3 years ago when I was in my early 20s and still a student, living in a very safe area. Growing up, I had loved martial arts and have grown up in a small rural town. I'd take what I could get. Karate? Fine. Judo? Sure. Kung Fu? Why not? Taekwondo? Sign me up. I loved martial arts because they helped me discipline my body and mind and grow my confidence. It had been a few years since I moved out of my country's capital to study, and I kind of fallen off the martial arts wagon at that point, with college taking up most of my time. I should also mention that at the time I lived with my younger brother and our cat. We lived on the first floor, next to a military camp and a patch of forest which led to a creek. On our back balcony, there was a circular metal ladder that would lead up to our balcony, and the kitchen door, which of course we always kept under lock and key, except for when the cat wanted to go out, when we'd unlock the door, and he would go down the outdoor metal stairs to find his cat friends and play. I commuted to my college every day by walking 30 minutes to a bus stop, and when riding the bus for an hour, and then taking another 10 minutes until I made it to campus. And when it was time to go home, I'd have to do the same thing over again, so as you can imagine it was very tiring. I would be out of my house every day from 10 in the morning to almost 10 at night, so when I'd come home I'd be knackered. I don't believe in premonitions much, but I do believe in instinct for quite a while. I felt like something was up with that patch of forest behind our apartment. I felt watched. Maybe it was the blackness of that patch of forest that made me feel uneasy, because there wasn't a single light there, and the outdoor ladder looked like it descended into an abyss. You could take 3 steps into a patch of forest and you'd be completely under darkness. It made me feel weird because even though I couldn't see anything, I knew that something was up, but I had no proof, but I do believe it. I was in class one Wednesday afternoon with my best friend at the time, and a professor came in to pitch an internship to us. Internships are very well known in my country, so professors actually have to argue in their case about why, as students, we could benefit from this. My best friend, I'll call Kay, was very interested, but when the professor listed off the requirements, she realized she couldn't apply, as her GPA wasn't high enough. This led to Kay having a crying fit after the class was over, which led to a panic attack, and it got so bad that she called her boyfriend to come pick her up from campus. And since I didn't want to leave her alone, I stayed with her until her boyfriend showed up and got in his car with her. The conversation in the car was basically me and her boyfriend trying to console her and help cheer her up. I asked her if she'd like to go with me over to her place so we could all hang, but she said she was okay and didn't want to put me through the hassle of commuting home the next day. So it was decided that they would drop me off to my house and they would go to theirs. We get to my house around 19 hours, a full 3 hours before I normally come home. I hug her and tell her to text me if she needs anything. I thank her boyfriend and get out of the car. Glad I'll be home early for a change. I went in through the main entrance, climbed up the stairs to the first floor, and put my keys in the lock. I opened the door and called out to my brother's name like I always did. I got no response. The house was dark, except for one light in the room where the front door opened into, and eerily quiet. I felt my stomach tie into a knot because even if I couldn't hear anything, I could feel that someone was there, and when my instincts talk, I listen. I turned right into the hallway that led to our rooms. I saw my brother's door slam shut hard as soon as I got in the hallway. My brother's room is on the end of the hallway on the left, facing my own room, which is on the right of the hallway. My first thought was that my brother had taken a shower and forgot to get a towel, so he made a run for it from the bathroom in embarrassment. But when I heard muffled whispers coming from his room, it sounded hushed and pressing. I still had no reason to be afraid, but I was on high alert because I thought my brother and his friends were planning on jumping out of his room and scaring me, and I wasn't about to let them get the satisfaction. So I inched down the short hallway through the darkness, and before I knock on my brother's room, I take a look at my room. It was a mess. My mattress was off my bed, my clothes and my books were all over the floor. My jewelry box was empty and was thrown onto my bed. All in all, it looked like a tornado had gone through there. and the hushed whispers in the next room sounded extremely pressing and anxious now that I was close, because I had tried to tiptoe as silently as possible. My steps had been audible. I realized what was happening and I went ballistic. At that moment, I lost it. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and it kicked fight into maximum overdrive. The words danger, thieves, fight hit me like a truck, and I threw my whole weight onto my brother's room, busting that door down so furiously you'd think it owed me money. I saw no one in the room, but it was also a mess, and I knew what I heard, so I ran into the balcony door. I ripped the curtain out of my way, went through the open balcony door just in time to catch one of the thieves right after he jumped off the balcony ledge. Looking back on it, he looked like a normal guy. Black hair, normal height, athletic build, big earring around his left ear, but at the time, he looked like a monster. A vile, putrid, home-invading thief. I started screaming unintelligible things as I saw him stumble around, obviously having hurt his leg before he got back on his feet and ran away. They were gone. I was safe. But then it hit me. Where was my laptop? I ran into my room and tore the place apart looking for it. It was gone. I started screaming and crying. The unfairness, audacity, and the cowardice hit me like a steel toe to the stomach. I screamed and cried like I was having a Grecian tragedy. I'm not rich by any means, and neither is my family. I had an old laptop which was worth pennies second hand, but I needed that laptop for my schoolwork, and without it, I couldn't finish my semester. Not to mention that I don't have many real-life friends, and a majority of my friends all the time were online. So if I lost my laptop, I lost them too. My laptop was lost, and so was I. I felt violated, dirty, and less than. I was afraid I'd throw up or pass out, or both. I was taking such rapid and deep panic breaths that my vision began to blur. In the most panicked and grief-stricken state that I've ever been in my life, tears streaming down my face, I called my mother to tell her what happened, and she told me she called the police. It took me almost a minute on the phone with the operator telling her again and where I lived, who it was, who I was, and what happened before she understood me and said she'd send someone over. I started running around the house like a lunatic, checking every door and every lock in a frenzy, until I got to the kitchen and saw that the window had been broken. Without thinking, I slammed it shut. Stupid, I know, but I was beside myself. I wasn't thinking straight. My brother came home a few minutes later, and when he came in, he saw me panicked, crying my eyes out, and speaking almost unintelligibly. He came to the bedrooms and saw the damage. He told me to go sit in the living room and calm down. I did as he said and tried to calm down, but I jumped at every second and started crying worse and telling him that I was sorry that I got home too late and that our laptops were gone. Our house seemed so big to me at the moment, so dark and so hostile. I felt so small and helpless. My brother called me over to my room and showed me a pillowcase full of something, and when we looked inside, we found our laptops, all my jewelry, my old phone, and some other stuff. They had been right in front of me the whole time, but I was so messed up that I didn't even register. The police eventually came about an hour later and did it all out, and so my brother and I took it to the police station and filed a report of the incident. And since I'd seen half of one of the culprits' faces, they asked me to come in for an identification. They even sent over someone to test for prints. Nothing came out of it, however. The police said that since I didn't have a backpack to put the loot in, I resorted to using one of our pillowcases. They were almost 100% junkies. We had the outdoor metallic ladder ripped off our kitchen balcony, much to my cat's displeasure, since that's how they got in. We almost installed several motion detecting lights. For the next few months, I was constantly on edge, and every time I passed near some suspicious character who hang around near my usual bus stop, I felt a violent rage boil in me. I had caught myself looking for the man I had seen, ready to beat him within an inch of his life, but I never saw him or heard his creepy whisper partner again. And my brother and I moved away from that apartment a few months later because I never felt comfortable in that apartment again. I picked up kickboxing, and because it made me stronger, it had helped me feel safer, and I always carry a knife with me now. I still think back on that encounter and realize how stupid I was. What creeps me out the most is knowing that at night there had been nothing but a thin plywood door separating me from two potential dangerous men. Even if I know that me busting in my door's room like a lunatic is what scared them off because of how stupidly fearless I was, I also realize how bad it could have been. They could have had guns, they could have had knives, they could have had pepper spray, or chain, or whatever. And there's two of them and only one of me. And if they ganged up on me, even with adrenaline having turned it to me into a doom guy, I don't know how much of a chance I realistically stood against the men. High on whatever they were on, and desperate enough to break into an apartment and stuff loot into a pillowcase. Had they been willingly to put up a fight, this would have ended in a very, very bad way for me. What I do know is that I probably still would have bust in there like Doom Guy. So to that creepy guy and those cowardly people who breaked into my apartment and tried to rob me and my brother and ended up traumatizing me so bad that I had to move, I hope I never see your faces again for the sake of it, because I've been kicking that sandbag for 2 years now and picturing your faces every single time. This was back in 2013 when I was living in New York City as a 23-year-old. I was living with my best friend from college on the west side near Town Square in K-Town. I was going through some tough times back then as I was unemployed at the time. I had a lot of time, so I would go on walks by myself to clear my head from time to time. One night I was feeling especially depressed, so I walked to K-Town and grabbed myself a drink by myself. I walked into a Korean bar and got some weird looks from the waiter as I asked for a table by myself. After ordering a couple of soju bottles, I was feeling pretty drunk, so I decided to walk back home. However, as I was exiting out of the bar, this Korean guy followed me. He looked very normal, just like a normal Korean guy. He told me he saw me drinking at the bar by myself and that he would love to walk me home to make sure I get home safe. I politely declined. After all, my apartment was pretty close, but he insisted, and he looked so harmless that I decided to take him up on his offer. We walked for like 10 minutes, I think, and it was quite pleasant. We were both a little drunk, but I remember talking all sorts of things. When we finally arrived at my apartment, I thanked him and wished him farewell. My apartment was a 5-story walk-up, and there was a main door where we needed a key to get into the building. I didn't think much of it, and inserted the key to open the door and went inside. The door takes a while to close shut, so it was my mistake for not checking before I went up the stairs. While I was approaching the second floor, I heard someone grab the door from closing, and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I literally got goosebumps all over my body as I felt like I was in danger. I started to pick up the pace, and I heard the footsteps going faster up the stairs. I lived on the 5th floor and I started to run up, clutching my keys in my hand. The guy started to run up the stairs as well, as I could literally hear him getting closer and closer to me. This all happened in a couple of seconds, but it felt so long. I finally got to my floor, and as I opened the door, I looked back and literally saw the guy's head on the staircase. I rushed to open the door and managed to close the door right in his face. My heart was beating so fast that I didn't know what to do at that point. It was already 3 a.m. and my roommate was asleep. Luckily, he didn't knock or anything. I just decided to go to my room and hope that he was gone. Around 7 a.m., my roommate woke me up. She said that there was a man standing in our front door. My heart sank and I explained the whole situation to her. She and I went to the door and screamed that we were going to call the police if he didn't go home. I looked at the people and he told me he would only go home if I gave him my number. We then called the police and saw him being escorted out. My roommate had to go to work, so she left the apartment and called me a few minutes later. She told me that she saw the guy speaking to the police downstairs. Apparently, he tried to lie to the officers that I'm his girlfriend and that we got into a fight. My roommate went up to them and explained to the officers that I did not have a boyfriend and she didn't know him at all. The police let him off with a warning. Around 2 hours later, I heard a buzz from the main door downstairs. Maybe it's the police? Surely it can't be him again. I answered the intercom and I was shook. Of course it was him again. Just give me your number and I'll go away, he said. I warned him that I'll call the police again if he didn't leave. A couple minutes later, I heard ferocious knocks on my door. He must have gone in when someone was entering the building. I was so scared at that point, so I immediately called the police. Unfortunately, the guy ran away before the police got there. The worst part about this experience was that my roommate and I were so scared to leave and come back to our apartment. I would have anxiety every time I come home and worried that I might see him again in our front door. For about a week, the police escorted us as we felt scared. I never saw him again, but it was one of the scariest moments of my life. This story happened a few years ago when I was in my early 20s and was studying in France, Paris. I was going home from uni. I usually took a short bus ride and walked the rest of the way. That day I felt slightly uncomfortable. I could sense some guy looking intensely at me. I was used to unpleasant and unassociated gazes, but at this time his gaze was beastly. It's hard to explain, but I felt like I was a prey being stalked. I decided to get off the bus a few stops early. I wanted to avoid him and didn't want him to see where I usually got off. Like I learned in the movies, I waited until someone pressed the stop button and waited until the last moment to stand up and leave. I didn't notice him getting off the bus. Just as I was feeling the relief of having escaped an uncomfortable situation, I looked over my shoulder, and there he was, a few meters behind. I had the distressed feeling in his eye that just looked away from the moment I turned. I walked into a shop, took my phone, and pretended to be in a call. When I couldn't see him anymore, I exited and made my way home as fast as I could. I kept looking back in the busy street. I zigzagged across the street every crossing. Finally, I believed that him getting off the same stop as me was just a coincidence. When I reached my building, I looked back one time, and there he was, his alarming gaze on me, smirking. I ran up to my apartment, climbing up the stairs 4 at a time. I reached the top floor, squeezed through my door and locked it and froze. My intercom was ringing. Don't ask me why I picked it up, but I regretted it the moment I did. I heard the opposite flat intercom ringing as well. He had pressed all the buttons one by one, hoping someone would open, but now he knew my name. "Gabrielle," he said. Oh God, I felt like a deer in the headlights, frozen. "Open the door, please," he said, in a plaintive voice. "I just want to talk to you." Somehow, I couldn't move or speak. "Come to the window," he added. "Look at me. You'll see I'm not a bad guy." Something clicked. He wanted to locate my apartment in the building. I was not going to make that mistake. I hung up. In shock, I waited by the door without moving for what seemed hours. I finally managed to calm myself. I called my long-distance boyfriend. "Call the police," he said immediately. Why didn't I call the police? I don't know. Today, it would have been the first thing I would do. The fear of making a big deal out of something not important, perhaps. What an idiot I was. I called my best friend instead. I didn't want to feel alone and told her all about it, and after a while I felt better, safe. We started laughing, but suddenly the intercom rang again. 2 hours had passed since I'd come home. I answered. "Gabrielle," said the voice. "Open, please." I still remember the chills I felt. He was still there. He was there all this time. I was silent, petrified. He was silent, but I could sense his trepidation. "Gabrielle, let me in. I'm so thirsty," he said. "Just give me a glass of water." This broke the tension. I hung up. Curled up in a corner, literally in recovery position, terrified, I waited. I was scared to make a sound. I knew he couldn't hear me from the hall, but I was scared to even breathe. The intercom rang again, and again. I didn't answer this time. I crouched to the sofa and fell asleep in exhaustion. I heard the intercom ring one more time in the middle of the night. I woke up in the morning, afraid to leave my apartment. I called my dad, who came to pick me up. There was no one in the hall, but there was a note on my mailbox. "Gabrielle, I'm a nice guy. You should have opened to me." We immediately went to the police station. The police listened and of course told me that I should not hesitate to call them. My dad called a locksmith to install digicode on the building doors the same day and wrote a message to each of my neighbors and asking them not to open the door to anyone they didn't expect. I never saw the stalker again.